Space has emerged as a central concern in our understanding and response to 21st century learners and preferred learning experiences. Space, and how we engage with it, and how we respond to one another within it, is critical to educational success. We find learning environments in a range of settings serving different purposes. At the Gallery of Modern Art in Brisbane, for instance, we see self-guided tours of exhibits. Museums have made considerable changes away from glass cases and hands-off displays to dynamic, interactive engagement with art and cultural artefacts. Here in my hometown, the recently opened library offers a space that is a far cry from the hideout I enjoyed as a kid, reading my way through fantasy and choose-your-own-adventure. Once through the inviting entrance, we encounter nooks and amphitheatres, desktops and glass rooms, spaces for whispering and spaces for lectures. There's a kids' play zone, a cafe for hanging out, and of course, free Wi-Fi. We still see spaces for more intimate or solitary activities, but this time they are inviting couches framed by flat screens. One of the key differences between this new generation library and the libraries of the past is the obvious flexibility. Spaces still offer certain options. It will be hard to have a lecture in a small meeting room, but the manner of engaging has altered. Now you're offered a range of engagement options, and even then there is flexibility built in. Do you want a group of 2 or a group of 6? Will you work alone? Will you be reading from your Kindle via Wi-Fi? Or do you need an actual book? The library of the 21st century offers a multitude of possible engagements. Let's contrast the library with another type of learning space. We're going to have a look in this dance studio close to my town as well. Inside, we are presented with prompts that serve the specific requirements of the learning going on inside it. Mirrors, bars, and a sprung timber floor each serve a purpose and tell us exactly what this environment is for. The particular aesthetics of light walls, airy and open, may be specific to this studio, but also contribute to how the learning feels. Inspired though it clearly is to the students, it would not serve as an ideal place to learn chess or have a group discussion. First, we would need tables, chairs, and possibly a heater or two in winter. My point is not to denigrate dance studios. They are clearly inspiring in their way. Rather, my point is to illustrate principles underpinning space design in schools by contrasting the two learning environments. Let's start with the dance studio. There are 2 key points. First, it's clearly designed for a purpose. Its form follows its function. Secondly, the space itself dictates what goes on inside it. The agents, which is the teacher and the dancers, have limited options within the space. The space dictates what goes on inside it. The library, by contrast, is designed in such a way as to allow a variety of behaviours. The design facilitates rather than dictates. It makes suggestions at times, lectures or lounging, but there is a flexibility built into the whole. This indicates a certain type of design. It acknowledges the agent, the library patron, as a contributor to the library experience. The space allows for agent control. It affords behaviours without having predetermined them. The parallel with schools is that design principles have made a transition from those similar to the dance studio to those of the new library. The key insight is that the agent, the dancer, and the library patron are given different status. The dancer has their type of behaviour dictated, whereas the library patron makes a series of choices to co-construct their experience. The latter is a player in the experience she has. Similarly, students have emerged as agents, as choice makers in their educational experience. Now, this manifests in different ways depending on the level of education. At tertiary level, it is seen primarily in choice of institution or course of study. And within compulsory education, where agency is recognised as equally important, it is reflected in building design and in curriculum delivery. course, it is not architects driving such a shift in what sort of experience students ought to have, though architectural ideas have certainly played an important role in the realisation of schools of the 21st century. It is schools and our developing understanding of the learner that are demanding a flexible learning environment where students co-author their experiences. In contrast to hierarchical and highly structured environments of industrial norms, open-plan buildings embody the general shift toward what Claire Melhuish calls free-flowing, loose-fit, multi-purpose environments which encourage individual creativity, social interaction, and the confidence to shake off mental straitjackets and develop exploratory thought processes. Such an approach is consistent with ideas of personalised learning and agentic students, with the goals of self-regulating expert learners. This vision is contrasted with schools of the industrial era. The industrial era school was an example of environment dictating practice. Much like the dance studio suggests a particular form of activity. The cellular classroom was designed to establish and emphasise authority. Students were expected to be obedient and docile. It prepared pupils for an age requiring a compliant workforce. The application of these principles produced buildings and arguably learning experiences of uniform size and shape. Nicholson described the buildings as cold and forbidding, and they're generally characterised as mass education. These facilities house rows of desks, assertively positioned teacher dais, and central blackboard. Oftentimes, the symbolic subordination was accompanied by the literal subordination by means of positioning female and naughty students to the sides or rear of classrooms and in the form of corporal punishment. You might recognise these ideas as belonging to a tradition of authoritarian behaviourism long since gone from schools. Such ideas are not necessarily coupled with single classrooms, but they are undeniably part of the tradition of teaching. And even outside of what appears an extreme example, the heritage of this era is clear, and critical to us is the inheritance of design. Gilk described the industrial era school environment as over-designed and predetermined. They have no active role for the learner. He is critical of the modernist understanding of architecture that positions the designer as the sole authority and the user as neutral, a passive recipient of the intended use. The shift from this to the vision articulated by Melhuish is marked. It is clear that much had to change to achieve such a move. Clearly, it is not buildings alone that bring about such a significant change in attitude and in practice. Social preferences also played a role. Mark Dujek suggested that while the 20th century saw some radical ideas in education, there was an equally strong conservative current. In other words, it's taken a long time for things to change. This isn't unique to education, but it remains a feature of our profession. It is our understanding of students as agents, as authors of the experience, players in the game, that is important here. As part of the shift toward agent-oriented, co-authored spaces, Gilk recognised the elevation of the agent in learning spaces. Participants, or students, become authors of their environment. Authority becomes shared between the producer, which is the architect, and the consumer, the learner. It's with these two ideas, with the student as agent from education on one hand, and user as author from architecture on the other, that we see a tremendous synthesis of ideas. Joss Boys acknowledged the increasing tendency for architects to articulate relationships between space and occupation less as a stimulus-response mechanism and much more as the dynamic interaction of social and spatial practices. The consequence of this understanding is that space is not just a neutral container or setting into which behaviours are poured. Boys described such an understanding as more than a one-dimensional causal formula. It is complex, partial and fluid. Indeed, Boys argues for an acceptance of the ambiguity of architectural space. It is neither determinist controller nor merely neutral container. Such a reading of space is informed primarily by the theories of constructivism and humanism. Constructivism positions the student at the centre of learning. Students construct learning internally and socially. It is neither transferred nor delivered. The cognitive reading has students processing information against previous experiences and knowledge to form new understandings. Humanism also informs the spaces. The spaces are modern, well-appointed and comfortable. They are inviting, non-hierarchical and arguably democratic in nature. So how are we to think of these spaces? Lippmann reckons that a sound response to modern needs is based on a transactional relationship, where the learning environment is understood to be composed of learners, teachers, and the physical environment. Where does that leave us as teachers? Accepting these ideas, how should we think of open space schools? A rather poetic way of framing such schools is provided by Barrett and Zhang, who call these schools finished beginnings. Jilk, along a similar line, suggests we think of these school spaces as permanent but incomplete. This understanding of school design presents a sophisticated appreciation of education and the architecture of schools that remains consistent with the reading of space as facilitating an as yet determined transaction between agents and affordances, between students and their learning experiences. This is not to say schools or teachers play less of a role. My research has revealed that the importance of structure and systems is amplified within open plan settings. The structures of implementation replace the previous structures of single teacher rooms, timetables or siloing of subjects. Of course, once this is achieved, there is greater scope to initiate a curriculum that works to strengthen agent-oriented learning, that exploits the non-hierarchical physical structures to empower students, that leverages the increased ownership and sense of community to heighten belongingness and engagement, to provide a rich learning environment.